If you look at Romanians and where they come from, it's quite vague and mysterious before about the late 13th century, when England was invading my country, Wales. But over in Romania, over and over again, you get a single word popping up, a Vlach. And this word spreads out. It's found everywhere between Ukraine in the east and Croatia in the west, up to Czechia and bits of Poland in the north, and Greece in the south. And it's used in reference to a people, but so much more than that, and that's what this video is about. This is Ben Llewellyn. Let's get into the video. The term Vlach comes from the name of a Celtic tribe in southern Germany during the Roman era, a confederation of Gallic peoples. And tribes with this name were found in Czechia, Iberia, and present-day Turkey. Its name was a cognate with Welsh today gwalch, meaning hawk, probably then a nickname for warriors who fought like hawks. This was brought into Latin as Volcae by the 1st century BCE. 1200 years later, Byzantine imperial sources began mentioning Vlachs across the Balkan zone. So, what happened here? Part 1. Eastern Romance. The first references to Vlachs are in Greek, Latin, Norse, and Old Slavonic, and they're describing speakers of Eastern Romance languages. By the 10th century, we can see the Latin that has formed this in the East has a very different underlayer or substrate, as opposed to Western Romance, which formed on top of Celtic-speaking populations and later under Germanic aristocracy. The case in the East was very different. So in terms of language, what has influenced the East so differently? Dacian and Illyrian and Thracian were the main substrates of this new continuum of Latin-based languages in the East, and would eventually shape Romanian. But there were other peoples in this area too. We don't exactly know who all of these peoples were. The testimony to whoever was living in the mountainous zone beyond the coasts in present-day Bosnia and Serbia are limited. And yes, there were Dacians across present-day Romania, but there were other peoples around the periphery, and we don't know who exactly actually formed these Vlachs. We do know that they were the Romanized populations of the mountains. And so these languages today, Romanian of course is the biggest, but there are others actually. There's Romanian, whose speakers have recently been called Vlachs, and they're spread out across Albania, Macedonia, Greece, and Bulgaria. You also have a language called Meglo-Romanian, which is linguistically between Romanian and Romanian. And then far to the northwest, in Croatia near Italy, Istro-Romanian, spoken by a few villages in Istria, a peninsula going into the Adriatic Sea. Now I must point out, perhaps sadly, that the Vlachs were much more numerous across the Balkans in earlier centuries, even as close as a couple centuries ago, because they had their own economy, their own legal systems, and their own autonomous regions, and before that principalities, which I'll get into later in this video. The point is, these Vlachs were majorities in pockets across western Ukraine, Croatia, Serbia, Bulgaria, northern Greece, Czechia in one or two places. And because Romania is at a crossroads of all of these lands, not just on lands but on riverways, waterways, trade routes, the mountain ridges which I'll mention in a bit, it was able to be a concentration place of these Vlachs, and they created a lingua franca that stretched out of Romania and into the Balkans, from which they probably came. It was back and forth, coming and going, along these highland roads. Now, this is not a video about the Eastern Romance languages. If you would like one specifically about them, let me know. But I had, and I must point out this fact, because Vlachs have been defined by this for so long, and it really is a dialect continuum in a way. Some people call it Common Romanian, but it went deeper than language. These were the Romanized natives who survived the Slavic expansion with a separate identity intact, and who also did not get sucked in completely into the renewal of Greek culture through the Byzantine Empire. They had held on up in the mountains along an entire separate road system they built with their migrations, and this gave them a distinct economy and way of life as upland shepherds. Part 2. A lifestyle. One thing that makes it difficult to set them apart from other peoples is they were surrounded by other peoples. The Vlachs, by the time they're entering into history in written record, are surrounded by other groups. They have become islands, an archipelago of Romance across the Balkans. And each of these foreign groups, the Serbians, the Bulgarians, the Greeks, the Albanians, the Hungarians, later the Ottomans, the Italians, various Slavic peoples, they influenced these groups, these Vlachs, and the Vlachs influenced them. One thing that differentiates the southern Slavic languages, and religion as well, the early Slavs pushed Eastern Orthodox upon this population, and many of them converted, and it became, later, an identity which they were very proud of. And then along the coast in Dalmatia, along the Adriatic Sea, some willingly chose Catholicism, and in Poland, the far south of it. The records are scant, but one way we can distinguish Vlachs from other groups is they held strongly to a nomadic, semi-nomadic mountain pastoralism, shepherd's hut economy, and cheese-making in sheepskins, sometimes sheep's stomach. The geography of this place was a broken landscape of twisting mountain ridges, and I need you to look at the geography here. The mountains formed ridges between the powers of the day, and these Vlachs, just like the Poles and the Ukrainians, were influenced by Eurasian steppe peoples in an ecosystem of the plain stretching from Mongolia to Poland. These upland mountain shepherds were part of an upland mountain ecosystem stretching from North Iran up into the Caucasus, across parts of Turkey, and into the Balkans. And these gave them cultural influences along these vast mountain shepherd networks. But one thing that is interesting is that Sardinia, an incredibly mountainous island in the Mediterranean, with one of the highest per capita heads of sheep, has many similarities to these Vlachs in terms of culture and shepherd culture and pastoralism. And some think that this is a leftover influence from the pre-Indo-European route that affected the early Indo-Europeans when they came into Europe. These Vlachs, they would come down from the mountains in winter and go back up in the warmer months. But you had multiple groups of Vlachs all over the Balkans, crisscrossing in different paths. These were not one-way roads, these were not even roads. Sheep migrating and moving along clan structure societies. And it makes it near impossible for us to know where exactly they began. They were wandering according to the seasons, and it meant this culture of Vlachs fluctuated in its shape and its physical location, as dozens of groups did this independently of each other. And whilst this disjoined archipelago of upland pastures and seasonal migration seems primitive at first glance, it was not. It was complex. This was an agreement between hundreds, if not thousands, of different groups that took centuries to construct. Customs, agreements that people knew by being raised in this culture from birth, clan stories, who was who, at what time of the year. And out of this having to negotiate between all these groups, speaking a continuum of Eastern Romance language, they created an independent legal system designed for people moving place to place. This was Vlach Law. Part 3 of Vlach Law. for the Kingdom of Hungary especially, but also the Serbian Empire, the Bulgarian Empire, and the Byzantine Empire, having a population along their borders who were not loyal to their enemies was advantageous. I mean, who doesn't want a buffer between you and people who want to kill you? Especially since this Vlach Law legal system obligated the Vlachs to military service in whichever country they happened to be in. They also had explicit right to carry arms. They were exempt from mandatory labor in many cases. This was so useful for Hungary that the kingdom promoted a mass settlement of Vlachs to move north into Marmuresh along its border with the Kingdom of Poland under their own ruler to guard Hungary's frontier. See my video on Moldavia for how this led to the founding of that principality. But in terms of Vlach law, in the Kingdom of Hungary, unwritten customs law had long been allowed to coexist with written royal decrees in law, which meant the Hungarian administration was perfectly placed to exploit Vlach law to create a two-layered military frontier along its borders to insulate the kingdom from invasion. Genius. A frontier that actually gave money to Hungary to strengthen Vlach identity and establish political polities. Whether Hungarians and Romanians like it or not today, it is doubtful either would have survived without what it gained from the other. Vlachs gained a recognized state in Wallachia and then Moldavia from Hungarian law, and Hungarians built a two-tier system of highly defensive borders using Vlach law. In Serbia, King Stefan Uroš used Vlach law to create a parallel economic system using Vlach tax avoidance to build monasteries and hospitals, whilst developing a road network through the highlands by using Vlach law to divide soldiers from bigger groups, which he then used to fight for him in Bulgaria and against the Turks. And rather than taxes, he could have Vlachs pay him through labor that built the manufacturing base of his kingdom and strengthened the pastoral production cycles. In the Habsburg Empire, later, in 1630, Emperor Ferdinand II issued a Vlach statute, which created a military frontier between Austria and the Ottoman Empire across Hungary and Croatia, which let Vlachs settle along this military border by using their tax laws and right to bear arms to create a buffer zone of men who were willing to fight the Turks to preserve their economic liberties. So these three major powers, the Kingdom of Hungary, the Serbian Empire, and the Habsburg dynasty further north, exploited the loopholes basically in Vlach law to consolidate economic power and create military frontiers between them and their enemies. Occasionally this led to semi-autonomous regions between states, even within states, and eventually, in the case of the Romanian principalities, it led to new states. Part 4. If you want more detail on the Romanian principalities, I'll put my video on the founding of Wallachia here. And I already mentioned Moldavia and the migration to Marmuresh Vlachs. Whoa, don't get angry. I know some of you in Romania might get angry from that. I'm not suggesting there were not Vlachs there already. I'm just saying there clearly was some kind of migration to Marmuresh, which led to the foundation of Moldavia. But for the time being, Hungary did this to defend its military frontier. However, from the 11th century, Vlachs are leading armed revolts against the Byzantine Empire, because under Vlach law, Byzantine imperial taxes were not always valid. Byzantine sources suggest whole areas of northern Greece were semi-independent and ruled by Vlach lords. Vlachs would be mercenary troops from the region for centuries, and Emperor Alexios, the first of Komnenos, is noted for telling a monastery on Mount Athos that the Vlachs do not pay their taxes, so he forcibly resettled them from the Chaldiki of highland monasteries to the south of Greece in the Peloponnese. I guess they got an extended holiday in the sun for free. The Vlachs revolted with Bulgarians to re-establish the Bulgarian Empire. In 1196, a Vlach warlord named Dobromir Chrysos, who had just been released from prison, began a revolt and built a tiny independent state in the fortress of Prosek in northern Macedonia, which astoundingly, the empire did not defeat him, and he kept his fortress by divorcing his wife to marry the daughter of a Byzantine warlord. That is utterly ruthless. Up and down this area, from northern Greece to Transylvania, Vlachs in the 12th and 13th centuries held remote lordships that began to grow their own independent principalities. It is just that only Wallachia was both big enough and far enough away from the major powers to consolidate territory early enough to exploit the political, religious, economic, and legal realities of the age to gain recognition on a Europe-wide level, which opened up the way for Moldavia a generation later. Vlachs elsewhere across the Balkans periodically revolted for tax rights or against tyrants, or were allowed to colonize at the behest of larger powers. But these areas of legal autonomy did not crystallize into states, like the Romanian principalities, due to a whole host of reasons, like density of Romance speakers, geography, international politics, the growth and expansion of Slavic populations, and religious centers of power. These things I do not have time to go into in this video, but it should be noted the Romanian principalities' people were called Vlachs by their neighbors for centuries, and the Romania's culture is shaped at its very core by its relationship with Vlach identity and those customs and heritages. Because in a way, the Romanians are the Vlachs who succeeded to not be assimilated and conquered. They are the Vlachs who have brought their culture into the modern world with their own nation-state. Indeed, speakers of these Eastern Romance languages are not just called Vlachs. Sometimes they're called Romanians. Thank you from the heart for your support. We'll see you next time.